Hi everyone that's willing to watch this. This is a duplication of my presentation from CentralSquare Engage 2020. There's been some modifications to this presentation. I've added a couple slides and I've also taken away some of them. Most of the ones that were taken away were audience participation or videos that would probably get taken down by YouTube. So keep in mind that a lot of the videos that are in here, any of the snips, and any of the software obviously is proprietary and confidential from CentralSquare. So please don't duplicate or share any of this outside of here without express permission. But otherwise, let me get this started. And we'll start going through here. Of course, this was my user-led session, thinking and creating ProSuite custom forms. And thinking outside the box is my theme. When I talk about thinking outside the box, what we're really talking about here is taking the modules and forms that are designed within ProSuite and making them customizable towards you. Now, I know that word customizable is something that originally when we selected this software, we were really told that this was not customizable. In fact, it's configurable. If I had to say anything, really, it's not really either one, but to me, I feel like it's both. And if anything more than that, it's flexible. Flexibility allows us to be able to change things on the fly, and it's one of the biggest reasons that we use this. So I'll go through a little bit, and I'll have a little bit of an agenda here. The items that I'm going to talk about, of course, like I said, I took some things out, but I added a couple more just in case. I really wanted to keep this kind of visually stimulating so it wasn't so boring. So it's got several elements in here that I think will kind of draw users along. I've really intended this to be not just for beginning users, but for anyone within the spectrum. And if there's anything that you can get out of this that I don't know, please share it with me. Maybe we could make something really good together. You never know. This is all about collaboration here. So the first things first, I'll give an introduction. I'll describe myself and Mustang, where I'm from, Mustang, Oklahoma. We'll go over just a basic, what are custom forms? What do you use them for? We'll talk about custom form templates, which is really your house for where you want your information to go. We'll show some custom form samples, custom module samples. These are going to be documents that you could use in your system or out of your system. If it's a state level form, you may be able to interchange it. Of course, we'll connect the dots between what you can do with these forms and your data. And then, of course, I'll give a conclusion. And question time doesn't exist, so you'll just have to email me, or my phone number is on the end slide. So, of course, on the very last slide, I will give my contact information, which remains the same. Hopefully, that's how you got my information if you're watching the video. So, without further ado, here's me. I'm the Lieutenant Commander of Support Services at the Mustang Police Department. I've been in this position since January of 2020. Prior to that, I was on the Technology Committee, which actually searched out for a new solution. We'll go into a lot of the aspects of what we use the program for. But primarily about me, let's just get this out of my way. Overall, I've got a little over 15 years in law enforcement. I've got over 10 years with the Mustang Police Department. Like I said, I started the CAD, we'll call it an adventure. I started that probably 2016, 2015-ish. So I've been through there for quite a while. In the meantime, I've really wanted to hit my education. My family hit home on this, that I didn't go far enough. So hopefully I've kind of measured up by now. I have an associate's in police science from local Oklahoma State University. Proudly, I went back and finished my bachelor's degree. And for some reason, didn't feel like that was enough. So I got a master's degree, both from University of Oklahoma. And because that didn't seem to be enough, I'm second year student, PhD. I hit on technology. That's probably my main focus. Fire and emergency management administration is something that really interests me because I started out primarily in law enforcement, but my role now really revolves around every aspect of emergency services and crisis. And Oklahoma is one of the great places to be involved in that because I think we see a full spectrum of any kind of emergency or routine call, I guess you could see, if you could say it's routine. So my department's not huge. We're not big by any means, I don't think, but we're pretty well divided up. We have a large section that, of course, is support services. So that's your civilian personnel outside of animal welfare. The rest of it's pretty much all patrol and detectives. I think we're a little bit understaffed. You can see there's some missing individuals that either I don't have their picture or they've just started or are getting ready to start. So pretty excited about that. If anything, I've seen this grow, of course, over the years since I've been here, and since I started in 2011. I think it will really, really grow, but especially by the time that I leave here, whenever that is, you've definitely seen change around here. One of the biggest changes would be to where I'm at. Support services didn't necessarily exist before my current role. It was basically split up into communications and jail, and then you had a records department. I'm really proud that what we like to boast about here is that we've unified all three of those sections in order to cross-train everyone so they can go from one section to another. And all of that all comes from the aspect of you have to know how to operate CAD. I believe that, and especially from where we're at here, that I don't understand how you would be able to function anywhere in this department and have any kind of knowledge or expertise if you don't know the CAD functionality of it. And all of the 9 employees I have are extraordinary at what they do. And everyone has their own aspect of what they like about this the best. So, of course, that starts with communication. So whether you're new hire, you don't go right into records. You start right at the beginning, and we get you introduced to CAD. So our CAD system, we use it primarily for police. Of course, it's law enforcement based, but we dispatch for local fire services. Local fire services are an ALS agency, so they respond to everything. We also have a really good relationship with a private ambulance service. We recently switched to a new ambulance service that's actually houses more trucks in the city, so that's fantastic. The last one that we do primarily is animal welfare. Our animal welfare center, which was also recently renovated, is busy beyond belief, especially over the last years and with COVID. It just shows the importance of all aspects of everything that you have to know and who to communicate to. So that's a pretty strong focus. Your records department, very standard. I staff 3 in the records department. Of course, everyone can kind of interchange out of there, and we really work with that cross-training to try to get people experience about what they know. The way our facility is set up, you can actually see that records is on one side, and you have to walk through the building to get to communications and into the jail. Your communication section is also going to be over your jail because our communication center is basically almost a watchtower over all of our cells. Although the officers take care of any kind of physical tasks that are involved in there, we do the management of the facility. And so being able to have people that can easily walk and interchange between the 2 departments, I think gives them a more broad focus and knowledge of how the system works. So a lot of the, we'll call it an expertise that I have on the system, it all comes from ideas that everybody shares. And I am very lucky that my staff is, like I said, phenomenal. They identify things that I didn't even think was possible before we started the system. So anyway, that's me. That's me on the technology side. So the technology, that's probably about the biggest thing that I can give to this. And I'm proud that I can fill that role because I know that there's not everybody is capable of doing everything, but everybody is definitely capable of giving something. So it really benefits me. So when I talk about, the things that we deal with, it's all problem solving. I think that's the most interesting thing about any kind of emergency communications is, and that's part of the reason why I got into policing is because that it's something different every time. At least from our agency, everyone that was involved with the initial process of looking for a software solution outside of what was our original punch cards is still here. We started with Zerker, now with CentralSquare. On the left side, you've got my current support services supervisor. She's been supervisor long before I was even in this position. And then on the right side, you've got our current deputy chief who we've gone through the ranks. He definitely has much more experience than me, definitely by decades. But we served as patrol together, so we have a really good relationship throughout the department. Of course, I was really proud that when we sought out Zerker, you can see that on the left side, they were predominantly in the north, and we were really, really proud of our selection because it was something that was different outside of here. And even when you look at any other solution that was offered around here, it just the ways that we can make this our own and take our own ownership of our system. That's what just drives my interest in this. On the right side, after um, years with Zerker now, we still maintain good relationships. On the right side, of course, you've got our account manager and our sales manager from back in the day, Dan Snell, someone that's very important in my life. But you still have fire chief from here in Mustang, Craig Carruth. He's still here. And then on the right side, you've got Chief Grosclose, who's also still here, just down the hall from me. Our first year that we went to Zerker, of course, I was pretty interested about it. But after actually experiencing a lot of the connections that you get from this, it was something where I felt like we were really on an island on our own and trying to figure out things. And I've built so many relationships now that I'm very thankful for everything. So that's why you'll usually see me if I go to something. I'm usually front row. So there's me, front row. I don't even remember who took the picture, but there's me. I made sure I got up right in front and center. And when you looked at the pictures of all of us, I was pretty excited that I got to meet Michael Zerker and, of course, Dan Snell, who's still a really great friend to me. But a little bit about Mustang, just so you can understand what our population size is. Our cities had a couple concurrent themes. We call it a city with a vision. It used to be a community with a vision, but really it's all about that vision. So what Mustang is, Mustang's relatively small. We're high density, 12 square miles. Our population is right around 25,000 or more, but our daily travelers, that's where we really get it. 90,000 or more, easy. We're in between turnpikes. We have 4 interconnecting highways. We have a school district that's 72 square miles with 1 high school within our central population. So everyone that's within Oklahoma City around us constantly comes here. So that's where we get our traffic flow. Our busiest times of the year are school year. And then outside of that in the summer is when we typically slow down, with the exception of most of the family events that we host throughout the summertime. Really interesting about our population, it's so diverse. We have Section 8 or government available housing and $5 million homes that are barely a mile apart. If you look on YouTube, one of the HGTV specials about fantastic scuba pool locations, if you search Mustang, Oklahoma HGTV, that's what you'll find. We have a whole, the diverse section of the population just goes all spectrums. The closest suburb, that's us, to Oklahoma City, Will Rogers Airport. We're just down the road from there. And of course, we're the largest suburb that's completely surrounded by Oklahoma City. We have 3 major highways that go through town. They crisscross and go north and south and east and west throughout the entire city. We're located right in the middle of Tornado Alley. We're really fortunate that we don't have the same issues that a lot of other bigger agencies have around us. But we're definitely right in the center, so we're an easy target for something that could or might happen in the future. You'll see that Oklahoma's right here. On the left side, Mustang, Oklahoma, right in the center with Oklahoma City. If you look on the right side map, that shows you Oklahoma City's square mileage in Mustang, that lower left-hand corner where the big rectangle. That's us. Oklahoma City itself is really unique. The actual size of Oklahoma City just doesn't do it justice. It really stretches resources thin because not only do you have 16, 17 plus other cities that are in and out of Oklahoma City itself is just so stretched out. I mean, you can imagine all these other larger cities that can fit in between here. Mustang itself, it's known for several different things. We host the Mustang Club whenever it comes through here. Quite quite a busy time for us. We used to shut down the main road and host it in the middle of the street, but now it's so big and the population is so dense around here that we moved it to main community centers. But of course, we're right through Tornado Alley. So if this gives you a little bit of context, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with weather radar. This is air velocity. So you've got a weather radar tower that's on the other side of the city, and your green is showing air that's moving towards the radar site, and red that's moving away. So it kind of looks like a little spiral or an S. You can tell that wind is rotating there. And the little yellow boundary here shows you our city. So this is the most recent tornado we had. This was last fall, and it shows you where that's the first place that it touched down. And to give a little bit of perspective, this with yellow star in the red. That's me right there. So got pretty close to this. But fortunate enough, one of my favorite things to do, again, with problem solving is try to mitigate issues that can happen. So you'll see a lot of that in any kind of forms that I create or anything that I do in the system is I try to kind of pre-plan and think ahead. The picture in the left is my wife and I. We built a house right there on that yellow star, and we thought ahead to build a safe room. Couldn't really find too many things around here. Most people have a garage shelter. Well, we built one above ground in our closet, so it's easy to get through. We were pretty proud about that. Again, with COVID, it took a while to kind of put this thing together. But we finally got it, and we did a lot of work ourselves. But that's just what it takes if you want to get it right. And I put in a lot of electrical work myself, again, because I wanted things done a specific way. So you'll see that again whenever we start getting into things, that it kind of has my touch on things. So not to say things can't be done a different way, but depending on who's doing it, you're going to see something different. So everything kind of works out in the end. This is us. Night we moved in, enjoying our neighbors who decided to come over. And then we finally finished up the back porch. So our cats have free roaming the place. So I'm a cat person if you haven't spoken to me enough. We used to volunteer quite actively with our animal shelter, and now we kind of turned our home into an animal shelter, so kind of fun. But the really interesting thing about Mustang is you can't get anybody down. So even the people that are not that forward thinking, they find a way to solve their problem. So if they can't get to the car show, and they'll just drive their broken Mustang here. So proud Oklahoma here. Anyway, when you get past that, we'll get to the meat and potatoes here of what this is. So custom forms. Custom forms allow the creation of any kind of form where a unique need is not fulfilled by a system form. Your system forms are very default. In our case, there's a lot of system forms that we can't use that are not specific enough to meet Oklahoma requirements for one reason or another. I think that applies to everyone. But what it means is it allows your organization to configure and optimize a tool within your system that allow your users flexible options. So that's where we really get into this, is what can support your mission and what will build avenues for everyone to get the things done that need to happen. I mean, it's business. No matter one way you look at it, it just has to be functional. Otherwise, it's a waste. So why we use custom forms in the first place? Most importantly, to replace paper forms. Like I said, we came from the punch card era. So our actual system, our CAD system, wasn't even a CAD system. It was just a repository of data that we would copy over from physical punch cards. If you're ever around here in Oklahoma City, feel free to stop in, and I have the punch card machine in our Historical Society display case in the front lobby, and it's not coming out. It was put out of use when we finally went live with CAD, and there was some hesitancy, but it's staying there. It's not going anywhere else. But the templates that you can use rather than system printouts allow you to use something that is, say, state specific. We have several forms that our state requires that if you get creative enough with this, your system can fill this out and they won't know any different. So in addition to replacing paper forms, you can replicate any of those forms that are created outside of your agency. and provide them with forms created inside your system, stored within your system in one central place, that instead of having to know which file cabinet to go searching for something, or if your officers even remember to go to use that specific file, you can manage it in the system and require it. So it helps them make sure that they get the things done so they can move on to the next stuff. The other thing is you can capture specific data that you're going to want to record with this. If you have, say, our state has mental health reimbursement. Mental health reimbursement requires certain information for mileage, certain information for where did they go, how long did it take the officer to transport someone, where did they go. You have a lot of trips that could be hours or more away, and we get reimbursed for that. But we have to capture that certain data. So what we can do is make a form that is required based on certain entries by officers, and it takes them 4 lines to fill out and capture the data we need so we can automate that process. So we're capturing it. They're finishing what they need to. They're not going to have to go back to it. Done and out, on to the next thing. With that data, you can populate information in a report module. So again, in that same scenario where you're populating mental health data, you can run a report, which is what we're doing, and use that data to populate forms that we can either automatically send out or we can export to, say, XML spreadsheet, or however your other party is going to want to use this information. In this case, and in the case with some juvenile stuff that we provide, you can actually use just a sample form as long as you have the right data and send it to them, and we can automate that. It assists and guides users to produce the final product of whatever your agency desires. So that's where you start getting into custom tailoring, unique drop downs. Say a drop down doesn't need to have certain options in it. Well, you can make whatever you want to do. So custom forms allow you to limit the options so there's less room for mistakes. It also speeds up how your officers complete reforms. Along with that, you can set default responses if you're going to expedite completion. There's going to be a lot of times where obviously certain forms are going to be filled out yes, no, and it's almost always going to be that for one reason or another, or you have certain numeric values that are going to be there for most instances, and that's something where you can set those to default. You just have to get careful with complacency, because if you do have something that's outside that spectrum, you're going to want to make sure that the officers or whoever's filling out any of your forms are not going to overlook that. So there's a lot of times where, for instance, in the system, there's a yes-no drop-down. Well, the yes-no drop-down, I have a custom one that makes you pick a certain value without any other options on there. Because if you automatically use a yes-no from the system's automatically going to pick yes or no, and there's no option for blank. So even though it's easy to choose yes-no, they just have to select which one they want rather than one being automatically filled out. But the option still exists for you. And the largest part is creating workflow, which requires forms under certain circumstances, for specific offenses, for case dispositions, etc. Certain case dispositions, an obvious one is if you have something that is cleared with a summons issued, your case is going to require a ticket. If you have something that's going to be filed in a specific court, a specific form is going to be required for that court whenever we send over documents to them, certain case summary sheets. And even something as simple as, like I said, the mental health travel that we do. Obviously, if you have that kind of incident, if you have anything where there's an emergency ordered detention, any of those things, you're going to want to automatically have those fill out and make sure that the officers are doing that. So we'll go into that here in just a little bit. So my original theme for this was go time. If anyone's a Seinfeld fan, I really, really liked that from one of my previous supervisors. I really wasn't into Seinfeld so much. It was kind of a late night show when I was growing up. But I really got some snippets off of that. So that's my theme for most of this. Like I said, I've taken out the videos, but if you search it, you'll find it if you don't already know. So just a little tribute to what I did on patrol. Collisions, man, that was my forte. Um, I wasn't as good as everyone around here at it, but I certainly liked it because I liked the problem solving aspect of it. And also, the biggest part from this is when I show up to something like that, I know what I need to do to complete the job. I know uh, what information I'm going to need for my reports. I know where I'm going. I know what I need to get. I know I need to get measurements. I know I need to know where someone's going to the hospital. I know I'm going to need certain values for what kind of intersection, and all those specifics. So it's all about what I'm trying to gather. So when we start with forms, my first question and my first stop for anything that I have to do, if it's anything of a form, is I stop. You've got to look at where you're going to go. It's the same thing if you're riding a motorcycle or a bicycle. If you are trying to go one direction and you look the wrong way, you're going to go where you're looking. So you've got to look at where you want to go, and that's going to help you out tremendously when you go to fill out forms. And it will even more so when you're actually creating these forms. So when you look at all of these forms, there's one big takeaway from it, and it's this. This is going to be called your tag. Your tag is going to be on every form. And all a tag is it basically tells you, I'm going to put this tag because in these certain blocks, I want data from the system. So on a municipal recognizance bond, for example, all of these black squares represent things that I'm going to need to fill out from the system, things that are going to have to be required. So I can build the form, make sure that I put those tags where I want them, and the data from the system is going to go in there. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But the tags are basically data coming from the system. So you just think about making your form for what you need, fill it with those tags. And there's going to be multiple options for filling those tags here coming up. But before we get into that, there's going to be two options on here. So whenever you make a custom form, think about this. There's two things, fields and data. Your field is going to be any kind of question or any kind of challenge that you have for your officers or users to fill out. Fields are going to be yes, no questions, custom drop downs, date, time, anything that could fill into that. Data, on the other hand, is things that are automatically from the system. Anything that's going to be logged in some other component to any kind of case or CFS or custom module or personnel, tows and impounds, any of that sort of stuff is data that's already in there, and it prevents you from having to redundantly enter a whole bunch of information. So that's what we're trying to do, is fill one of those two things in those tags that we have on any of our forms. So when we look at forms, the forms allow the creation where a unique need is not met by those system forms, as we discussed, but further optimization is needed for some specific component. So when we think about forms, you got to find the right place for it. So obviously our main home, probably for most law enforcement, is going to be either cases or CAD, CFS. But think about this. Depending on if you need it for civil, for jail, for personnel, for records, administration, organizations and gangs, and custom modules, there's a certain value set that's going to be available with that data that's not in the other. A lot of information that's going to be in cases is not going to be available in CAD. For instance, if you're wanting to fill out a vehicle impound form and you're using cases, which is almost the most logical place to put something, so your officers open a case and they fill out a vehicle impound form. Well, there's going to be multiple vehicles to select. But if you fill it out from CAD and you fill it out from the tow module is only going to have one specific vehicle that your dispatchers, your support services are going to create a record for. So you don't even need to have the officers select anything, because that tow data is going to have one car with every single bit of information in there. So it makes things go faster. So what we're doing is we're leveraging that data. You can utilize automation to reduce errors. If the VIN number has already been transferred from NCIC, you're not even having to worry about an officer in the field fat fingering, not on any part of their own, just trying to do their job and go faster. VIN numbers, tag numbers, names and data that could be put in by mistake. These things that are automatically filled out They improve the speed and efficiency. And more importantly than anything else is you get buy-in from your officers having to fill these out. If you're asking them to fill out an impound form, and the impound form fills out everything from the tow module with the exception of condition of vehicle, keys, everything else is automatic. Record service that's selected, VIN number, car, tag, uh, color, all the features that you can have in there is automatically filled out by dispatch. That makes their job easier, which, at least in our case, makes them like the system a lot more. That's the flexibility of this that I feel like you don't have from a lot of stuff. So here's the cost of incarceration. Very simple. Cost of incarceration, we showed the form just a little bit ago. This is what it would look like on their end. You can see that in all the plain text right below the title, that's data that's going to come from the system that's in this individualized record. So there's no reason to enter any of that stuff or even select it again. The only thing that could be different in this case is if you have additional costs that are unexpected. So unexpected cost in our case could be some kind of specialized meal, some kind of destroyed blanket, some kind of property we had to use. Maybe we lost jail clothes or something like that. It's not something that's very specific or that we run into very often. So what you do is we take that incarceration form and all of that information that's automatic, you can fill it out. But it doesn't take any effort to fill it out because it's already done for you. So that saves the time for my jailers, for support services, from actually having to fill this out. Going even further from that, I already know that it's going to be $30 per day charge is what our standard fee is here that goes with their cost of incarceration. So I don't even need them to fill that out. I can take that day in jail, multiply it by 30, and have that cost. If I have any additional costs, I'll just add that up, and I'll know the known total of what we need to provide. So we can provide a receipt in the office, or we can send it with them if they're transported to any other location. We don't have to worry about making any kind of mistakes. And like I said, more than that, it's automatically done for them. There's nothing else they have to do. If there are no additional costs on here, they basically create one form, print it, and they're done. There's no double checking anything because it's going to be in there right before their incarceration date from whenever they were brought in. They don't have to go back and figure any of that out. If you have one thing that's happening on one shift and one thing that's happening from another shift, you don't have to worry about any kind of miscommunication about when someone came in or having to put sticky notes on folders and any of that because it's all saved in the system. And for the most part, in this case, it's time-stamped on its own. So when I was talking about your vehicle impounds, this is a theoretical, same exact process that could be done from the tow module. Like I said, all this data that's in there is going to be filled out automatically whenever you copy your information from NCIC. So the only thing that the officer may need to fill out in the field other than an inventory, your inventory and maybe condition of vehicle, are here's a limited number of questions. So the vast amount of information in there is already in the system. There's no need to have them fill any of that out again. So it will transfer automatically to any custom form that you fill out. Now, the form on the right is not a standard form that would come from the system with just a typical letterhead on the top, but it could be anything as simple as this. This is just a Word file with a couple borders around the information, and everything is titled. That's well enough. It could be gone further, or it could be even simpler, just depending on what your requirements are. But then again, it's your requirements. So if you want more, it's up to you. If you want less, it's also up to you. But there's no other way around that. It's your decision. So that's where you get into it as the designer of the forms, is you guide your agency and your users how you want them to complete stuff. So in this case, they don't have a choice. They can't enter anything on there. And you see on the left the red blocks that are on there. The red blocks are required questions that they have to have. So they can't even complete the form without asking those questions. But those questions are the only ones that your communications is not going to be able to answer for them. So they're going to need to fill that out. Same exact thing can happen with a standard media page. This is a initial offense report that we provide for open records requirements. We provide initial offense report for literally anything that happens around here. even if we're not permitted to give out any further information. In the past, our previous system, what you would do is you basically write two narratives. One narrative would be, of course, your standard narrative, and the second narrative, your news narrative. It's written differently per officer. You have one officer that fills it out one way and another fills out something else. And then before you know it, that officer trains someone, and then that officer trains someone. And like a tall tale, it changes over time about what to put in there and what not to put in there. It's not uniform. The other thing that you risk happening is if someone is not catching information that's in there that shouldn't be, there's a very good potential that you could be giving out victim information that shouldn't be in there, suspect information if they haven't been charged with a crime. There's a whole vast array of this stuff. So what I can do is create a custom form that, again, the officer fills out 4 questions. These are the 4 questions that I want them to confirm. The rest of it's all filled out and automated and printed. That way we can give this out to the media on request. If someone comes in and wants to fill out a stolen property for their car was, burglarized during the night, well, we don't have to wait for the officer to complete the entire form or the entire case. If they complete this initial offense form that's on there, we can go ahead and give them something the same day so they can take this and give this to their insurance company. We'll have everything that they're required on there. So just a quick overview. I'm going to go through what custom forms are. We're going to look at the case form section on here because it's pretty standard throughout most of the form sections, but the case forms is probably what we use the most. So we're just going to go through this and show what this is. Your case forms, of course, system administrator. It's going to be your system admin tab. Each one of these and each one of these sections is going to have custom forms on here. Our custom form that we're going to look at is within the case section. So these custom forms apply to your cases for your agency or agencies that you support. So what I'm going to do is, starting from the right side of the screen, we're going to go counterclockwise, and I'll go through every single one of these briefly so we can describe what they are. So on the first tab that's on the right-hand side where it says agency is allowed to create forms, depending on how many agencies you have under your license or under your software agreement, you may dispatch for multiple agencies. In our case, we only dispatch for 3, but for simplicity's sake on here, our fire department uses their own RMS and animal welfare we have filling out under the police department. So only officers of our police department are able to see these forms. That's just the way that it's set on here for me. Your form name, that's a big one. Think about the way the forms are going to show up whenever the officer goes to fill out a case. Your form name is what's going to show up whenever they click to add a form. So if you add something and you really want to keep this organized, think about what it's going to look like for them. Make sure it's easy for them to find. Make sure it's not named something really extensive and technical. It's got to be something easy and straightforward for them to find. We have a lot of forms that they can print in the car, and there's duplicates that they can print in a car. So if you have a suspended driver's license, per se, and if we're required to seize that license, if they are arrested and we bring them here, there's no need to print this out in the car. So there's a driver's license form that you can print out from the system, or they can just attach within their case file. But if they're in the car and they're just going to do a cite release, well, they could give them a receipt in the car. So if you notice on my choose forms here, I use a little trademark logo to note anything that could be filled out on the thermal mobile printer. So that's what I'm using that for. So you're not limited to using just A through Z, 1 through 0. You could fill out anything that you want to put in there. Anything that's pretty much a standard character value you can put within here. So next on down, we're looking at the layout section. The layouts, there's going to be 2. So you've got columns and rows. Columns and rows just that has to do with how you create the form, and also has to do with how the form is displayed for everyone. So on the left, I've got rows, and on the right, I've got columns. As you can see, it's straightforward. The biggest thing about this is when you start filling these out, your characters are going to start running off the page. Your options are going to start running off. So it's really easy when you start adding all these elements, but they need to be in such a row that it's comfortable for your users. So When you're actually creating these, it's pretty easy to see. But think about what happens when your users are filling these out. So this is a completed form on the left and the right. So you've got rows and you've got columns. Not really such a big deal. But when you start getting a lot of questions that have to be filled out, and maybe it's a little bit easier on the desktop, but say you're using tablets in the field. Those tablets have a different resolution on their screen. So the resolution is going to mean that they're going to have to scroll one direction or another. So on your rows, obviously, everything is going to start going up and down. And everything's going to go left and right if you're having columns. So here's where you start getting into it. You have to think about that what's going to happen whenever they start scrolling this data. What makes it easier for them? So if you're going to do rows, it's going to go up and down. They're going to start scrolling down once it gets to the other, and vice versa on the other side. They're going to scroll left and right. So what's easier? Another thing to think about is trying to make things as uniform as possible so they don't get confused if they're going from one case form to another. Perhaps you want all your desktop forms to be filled out up and down and all your mobile to be filled out left and right. In our case, I try not to overwhelm anybody and have anybody confused about using a form that they're not, maybe they don't use so often. But at least if they open up the form, they know, when I fill out what's on here, I need to scroll down and look at the other options that are on here. I don't have to worry about, wait a minute, am I going up, down, left, right? You just think about that the way it is. So one thing to think about, the last little caveat to that, is if you're making rows or you're making columns, and all of a sudden you decide, I did the wrong one. Don't fill it out one way and then choose to go fill it out the other way. Because what will happen is you're going to have to start over. So think about that again, where you're trying to go, and stick with it. Stick with it from the very beginning. Otherwise, it'll clear all your stuff. So if you do happen to get to that, this is what you're going to see. It's going to tell you that you're going to remove everything from there and start over if you switch between one or the other. So pick one way and kind of set to it. So in my situation, I started with columns. I probably felt like the first two forms I did. Didn't really like it so much, and then I went with rows. But that's personal preference. For me, I'd rather go up and down than left and right. But for you, it might be a little bit different. So again, that's flexible depending on the way you want to look at it. The next option that's on here is going to be your mode view. It says view and edit. Very straightforward. View, you got to think about is what it looks like if it's printed on a piece of paper. And edit is what it's going to look like if you're going in to change the values on here. So this just decides that when the form is completed, what's it going to look like. So once your officers or users go in here and save this form, if they need to reopen it, what's it going to look like? Or say in the instance of our initial narrative report, it has those 4 questions on there they fill out. Well, they're probably not going to go back to that form again. But who is going to go back and look at that form? Well, it's going to be someone in our records release department that's going to release those out. So it will save them time in that situation to go back in and view it from the printed page. So they can click it and it shows them immediately what the page looks like so they can print it out. On the flip side of that, if you have any kind of use of force form where you have a supervisor review that's going to go back in and they're going to make changes or additions to any kind of form on there, well, it's going to be better for them to go in and edit the form because they're going to add more to it. So that way they're skipping a step. So here's what that will look like. So here's a sample form that I have on here. I just have one drop down on here. If I save and close this form, on the left side is going to be save and close, where I'm going to go back in and edit. And the right side is going to be save and close, and I'm going to go back in and do a view. So again, if I go back in and edit, same thing. Brings me right back to that same screen. If there were more questions that say supervisor needed to fill out, they're going to be all there. On the right side, it's going to take you to a print preview form. So that's where it's going to be printed out. And that's basically all that is it's just print preview. So it just brings you to the either what the printed form would look like or whatever edit that you may have to do on there. So it just depends on per form what your preferences is. On this side, at least, if you choose one and the other, and then you decide that you'd rather have one versus the other, it's not going to be like rows and where it will go back and change anything. You can interchange this as much as you want, wherever you feel comfortable with it. And so you don't necessarily need to set on that. So at least normally what I will do is start with it on edit, and then I'll go back and change it to view if it's something where people are using that a lot, or my records department's printing off a certain form in a specific way. Then we'll go back in and we'll go change that kind of on the fly. It just depends on what happens when you deploy the form. So going on, now we're going to hit the menu side on the left. Menu side. So you've got add row. If you're in columns, it's going to say add columns, and that's straight what it is. Every time you click it, you're going to add more fields where you can enter data. Of course, on the fields, you can keep adding items within each row, or you can just add one per row if you want to have everything stacked on one another. It can get kind of messy if you start adding multiple questions or data within certain lines. So sometimes it makes sense to just add a new row, and that's been my preference for most stuff. Default form title. The form title is going to be a little underlined text that tells you what the form title is. This is not anything that's required. This is something that may be per agency. So let's take, for example, our state crash form. Our state crash form requires 4 pages for every 2 cars. So if you have a single car accident, you're going to have 4 pages no matter what. So if you had that sample report, perhaps page 1 of the car crash, the default form title should be car crash page 1. And then you could go on from there. So while the form name is going to say collision report, the form title may say page 1, page 2, page 3, and it will probably help them whenever they are trying to view forms within a case. That way they know they're opening up the right one rather than just looking at the form name. So that form title shows up whenever you're editing the form. If you don't have a requirement, which is in most of mine, it just shows up blank. It's not required unless you make it required. Otherwise, that's kind of an option. It's up to you. Historical version mapping is something to think about. The more that you change forms that have already been put into place and have already been utilized, the values are going to kind of change. But the historical version mapping is going to allow you to be able to translate one field from another. That way, if you run a report, you'll get consistent data. So here's what I've got here. Say I have officer on this form. So I have sample form title, and then I have an officer dropdown. Well, say something changes, and I need to change that verbiage. So say the verbiage on here becomes primary officer. Well, if you go to historical version mapping, you can see that that blank that was officer was changed to primary officer. So the verbiage changed, but as far as reporting goes, I want those two values to match up. So if I run any kind of new report, I want those 2 fields to match up so I don't have to have data not show up from the point that I made change on the form. So that's basically what that is. Depending on how old your forms are and how much you change things, things can get quite messy in here. So be careful with that. Again, that's how you can map what you want that to be and what you want it to show up. That makes your reports run, essentially, is basically what that is. So your available tags are those little blocks we talked about, where your data is going to go. The available tags section is listed here based on when you put in your form, it's going to map everything that you've used and tell you what's available and what's not available. So if you were to click this and you didn't have a template in here, you don't have a Word file or anything, they're all going to show up red. And what this is telling you is all those are in the form, but they're not being used for one reason or another. So where this is really going to help is if you add a template. So here's a custom form that I've made. I haven't done anything really fancy with this. It's case, agency, address. I've got a title in here for no reason, and I've got an officer drop down. So if I add a template, and my template's going to be sample Word file. Now, keep in mind that if you want to do this sample Word file and you want to do a sample Excel file or a PDF or however you want to map this out, they're all not going to show up in the same file. You're going to have to specifically choose on the right-hand corner. But on this one, we're going to do just a Word file. And so here's my file that I'm bringing in as a template. It only has 4 4 options. 4 of these tags are filled out. For whatever reason, I want agency, I want the address of the agency, I want the case number, and I want the primary officer. And then I want it filled out with my logo on top. Say this is a cover sheet for some reason or another. So if you went back to that available tags, so you can see that my 4 options are on here, and 2 of them are not being used. So you can use those, but I've chosen not to because those are just blanks that I have in here to try to separate it out when the officer fills out the form, maybe some instructions and whatnot. But it is telling me that those 4 items are in my template and will be printed on there. So basically, if you take the template on there and if you fill out the form and you printed it off, those 4 are going to show up. 1, 2, 3, 4. If it makes more sense to use one before the other, but say, for instance, on the left side, you can see that some of it is data and some of it is a field. Well, only one of them is a field. The other 3 are data. So if the officer opens up the form, I want them to pick. There's only one drop down that they need to pick. It doesn't have to be officer. It could be some other decision. But on my template, it could show up in a different location. So things don't have to be in one specific order. You can reorder them any way that makes sense from filling it out, and it can be different from what it looks like on your template. It doesn't have to be exactly in the same place. That's again, your choice, the way you have it filled out. I would only caution if you have a very standard state-specific form that people are used to filling out, handwritten, and all of a sudden you go to a digital format, I would recommend doing it in a certain way that makes sense so it's not completely foreign. So like a crash form, if you're used to putting certain information, latitude, longitude at the top, I wouldn't just have it in the middle of the form or at the bottom all of a sudden, because they're probably used to filling that out first. It's going to slow people down or make them confused. That'll reduce your buy-in. So definitely try to keep it in some sort of easy to recognize format. So here's my sample form as it's filled out. Like I said, I've got that drop down at the top because that's the only one that they have to pick. Everything else is automatically filled out as a data section, and then it populates on my form in print preview. So when we get into the meat here, so you've got your fields and your data. Data, of course, is the first thing that I try to do whenever I look at a form, is I try to look at what I can automatically fill out. So case number, incident time, just like my sample form, I can get all the way down to the agency that employs your primary officer. You can go in and you can fill all these things out automated. When you look at what's going to happen here, there's a label. The label on both sections here is basically what the question is that's challenged to the officer that has to fill this form out. So your label could be a question like, who is the primary officer? Who is let's not say the suspect. Let's say something that's totally weird. Like, what's the name of the owner's dog, or something like that. The label will make sense, and that challenges the question that they have to fill out. The field tag, on the other hand, doesn't have to match, but sometimes it kind of helps. The tag is basically whatever you name this, it's whatever it needs to be on your form. So I've got case number here. So the label may say case number, but the field tag, in my case here, just says case. Just because I think it's easier for me when I go to fill these out. Your label position is going to show you what the question, that challenge is, and then in what relation to that is the option that they have to fill out. If it's above, the challenge is going to be above, and right below they have to pick a drop down. If they do beside, it's going to be to beside it. I usually try to keep everything all one way or all the other. Just depends on what it is. In this case, the question challenge is probably just yes or no. So that yes or no doesn't have a very big block. But if you start to have very long answers, it's going to look weird one way or another if you're trying to fill these out and you have one going up and you have another one going beside. The other thing that will happen is if you're doing a default form without something that you've custom put in here, then if you go to print it out, it's also going to look the same way as this. So kind of think about that. So you can tell the way that each one is just by whenever you look at it on your screen here. So this is showing you the same way that I've got those laid out, one beside and one above. You can kind of tell which one is which. So if by chance you're making these and you accidentally do one versus the other, things are just going to kind of throw itself off, and you'll be able to see that you want it one way or another before you actually go in and kind of test the form. So when we go into fields, the fun part. Let me get a drink over it. Okay. So fields. Fields are the top form that you can fill on here. These are your challenge questions. These are things that are going to require some kind of input from your user, whether that's an address, any kind of number, any kind of date, dollar value, or you can keep going with any kind of number, any kind of custom checkbox where they have to click yes, no, do a drop down for yes, no, they have to enter a vehicle tag. There's several of these that I really like. The date and time is a very obvious one. Again, you've got your label, field tag, and position of where this data is going to be on your form. Very straightforward. But you also have this section on here that this is something where it asks you, do you want to make sure that this field is required or not? So like you see those red blocks that are above me, I can't make a field without having a label and a field tag. This is what's going to be for the user, that if you click required, they're going to see the same red option, but they can't bypass it. They have to fill this out. If you get to retain value for save and new, this basically tells you that if you create a secondary form, so we talked about our state requires 4 pages for every 2 crash units that are in a collision. If you have a 3 or 4 car crash, you're going to have 8 pages. 4 pages for every 2 units. So the officer can speed up the process by using that same page 1 they did and making it now page 5. They can use each one and copy each one over. So these retain value for save and new is telling you to copy values for save and new so they don't have to re-enter that data. It doesn't start over as a blank form every time. So if they're re-entering page 1 as now page 5, obviously the page at the top, the page number, 5 of 8, they're not going to have to enter that, or they're going to have to enter that again. They're going to have to change that value, but they don't need to change the case number. They don't need to change who's unit 1, 2, 3, 4. They don't need to change any of that data. So this makes things go faster, that they can duplicate these. So you can do that with any number of different options on here. Maybe taser applications, some use of force where it's like some kind of combined effort or something like that. So you can go in and choose what values will carry over and which ones don't. The default value, this would be something where, especially on date and time, it'll use right now. So if you're filling out driver's license form that the officers are going to use in the car and give them receipt and instruction on how they can get their driver's license back. If they open this form and I have it selected current date and time, they don't have to go in there and choose what date and time are they going to pick. Not that that's very hard, but at least it's one step that they don't have to do, because the system is going to assume that when they create the form, the current date and time is when they're going to print that form out and what it's going to show on there. One of my favorite options on here that makes things go faster is drop down record data. So you have custom drop downs, standard drop downs. Record data drop downs is only going to let you select options that are already within the record that you're filling out data from. So if you have vehicles, if you have cars, if you have offenses, if you have property and evidence, physical property and evidence, there's no reason that they need to go in and re-enter that data. So if we have a evidence sheet that we're going to provide to the district attorney that shows what physical evidence we have that we're supporting this case with, I guess you could print just your standard form out that would show your evidence section. But on a cover sheet that we would fill out, that cover sheet is going to show all of your suspects, all of your witnesses, all of your evidence, and all the officers involved. So we can automatically have it fill out the officers involved, but this lets you choose, because you may have 3 witnesses, one complainant, one victim, and one offender. Well, if you choose names, that lets the officer go down and pick through that list of people that are in the cases and choose the right person that needs to show up in the offender side. And then they can go in and they can choose from those names which one shows up in the witness side. So that's really where that comes in. What you have the option to do is also add data that will show up on that form. So again, if we're going with that theme of using data on like a witness page, the witness information the DA is going to need. They're going to need address. They're going to need phone number, maybe email addresses. Probably not eye color, hair, weight, all that stuff. They need ways that they're going to contact them. On the flip side, for their offender, they're probably going to need build, complexion, date of birth, ethnicity, eye color, hair color, height, weight, all that stuff. Because if this person doesn't show up for a warrant, doesn't show up for court, that's the information they're going to use on their warrant. So that stuff's pretty important for that. So basically that section there is going to give you those 4 things that come from your cases that you can automatically fill out. So that helps quite a bit. It automates to an extent. I actually use that for more things than what I can think of right now. So here's a little bit of this in motion, just so I can hit this one home. The offender on here, I'm going to have it do the name. And then the offenses, this is a case. So if they're filling out my sample form and I have record data on there, there's 2 options that are on here. I want offender and I want the offense. It could be something really extensive or something really simple. Obviously on this one, whenever they do the offender drop down, there's 2. You got a witness or a complainant, and then you have the offender. So in this case, whenever they use a drop down, there's only 2 people that are in the case. So the officer just picks the one that's involved for this. On the offense, there's only 1 offense. So there's no way for that to be a mistake. It just makes it easier. They don't have to go type in the offense or anything. They just fill it out in there automatically. That may help, like in this situation, maybe not so much because it's pretty straightforward. But you may have a situation where you have multiple offenders for multiple different offenses. So if you're filling out those case summary sheets that you give to a district attorney, that's when you're going to want to go in and have one different from the other. So it helps that you only have a limited number of options to be able to click. That lets you set everything up. So everything should be just a little bit easier to fill out. Definitely a lot easier than having to go in and manually fill everything out. Or in the case of our old system, fill everything out like 2 or 3 times. Probably bare minimum. The only other thing that I would add to this is there's an option that says link to record. Link to record is basically going to take this value and make sure that it's visibly connected with another module or another thing that's within the case. So if you have a impound sheet that's completed in the tow record and you wanted to do a link to case, the link to case and the tow record will show up together with one another. The same way the inmates will typically show up automatically linked to a case. So this is a manual option. So maybe you have 2 cases that are linked together that are otherwise not linked together. This will help. Of course, you can automatically link those 2 together through the linked screen. But if you wanted to have it related to a form, here's what's going on. So this is an open burning complaint by a fire marshal. Say that there was 2 open burning complaints. So if I want to link those 2 records together on a form, I use that linked case because that's the record that I chose to link. So whenever I link to record, the cases is the one I want. There's a lot of different options you can put on here. Like I said, there's CFS, inmate, warrants. There's even more than that depending on where you're at. On here, I'm going to choose that case. So basically, if I click that, you're going to see anything that's on here. So in this case, I want to link 2 burn violations together because maybe they're related to one another. So those two violations are on here. So I'll choose which case I want. If by chance I choose the wrong case, you can remove it. But otherwise, if you have it right, you'll know you have it because the linked record is going to show up red. Sorry, if you can see it's red there on the top right-hand corner. So when we get down to some more of these custom drop-downs on here, the custom drop-downs are basically anything that's not in the system that you want to put in there that's going to be a limiting factor for what an officer or user fills out with their form. So these are some of mine. I'd say I have more than a handful, and I would say that probably once a week something else gets added. But I like these more than anything else. Excuse me. So whenever you add those in here, these are again something that's within system admin. You limit the options that are in here. So like I said, that there are yes and no boxes that are filled out. The yes and no boxes are a system standard. You get yes, no. There's no in between. It's either one or the other. In mine, the way I have it set up is I have yes, no, maybe, yes, no, not available, check marks and X's, you name it. Whatever makes a certain form meet the requirements of whoever's receiving it. Our state DPS is going to require certain check marks. They're not going to accept any kind of other mark within the box. So that's where I use that. So I've got one for everything. So when we actually look at where all this data is going to go, so let's start with our template files. So let me catch a breather here for a second. So your template files that we're going to talk about on here. PDFs, I'm not going to go over very much because I feel that, at least for this purpose, Excel and Word are going to be the most common things that anyone has available to them. And they're the most common ones that I use. So let's start with Word. Word is going to be any kind of form where, to me, is you're not trying to do anything more complex than get data from the system into a specific format for what you're going to use. So I've got warrants that are filled out a specific way. I just need the data put on that form. I don't need anything fancier than that. Case retentions, evidence dispositions, summary records, hospital releases on inmates, intents to withdraw criminal complaint, anything that you want where nothing needs to be more complex than I need this data here. I don't need anything else done with it. Anything that needs to be filled out in a certain way, I just fill it out with Word. That's the easiest way to do it. You can do pretty much anything with that. These are custom forms that are filled out based on templates that are similar to another agency. So you got like DPS templates. DPS templates are not something that they hand out other than like a PDF, but we can mirror it in the system and have it fill out any way that we choose to fill it out. So I'll give you some tips for that whenever I get to that here in just a minute. But what you can do is you can fill out any kind of form on there, and you can also set it to any kind of parameter, any kind of printing schedule, depending on what device is printing it out. So when I talked about driver's licenses, the seizure notices that we give, on the left side, you've got the one that the state gives that we can print out on our department computers here, go to jail. If you want to print something out in the car, there is the standard format that the Highway Patrol gives out. We can customize it. That way, it looks the exact same, and no one knows any difference, but it gets the job done. And it fills out, and it uses for our specific printer devices that are in the car. But you can do that with anything. So if you have crash exchanges, if you want to give out a business card, if you want to give out some kind of maybe a search consent, something that it has some level of customization that needs to have specific data in that section, but printed out in the field that they're not going to, your officers aren't going to have in like their notebook or something like that. This gives a little bit, and like I said, it's more in a central repository. So as long as they're connected to the system, they can get to all these forms. They're not going to get lost if they're trying to look for where this consent form is. That really helps us. I'm still with accident reconstruction, and if we have a fatality collision, then we need to do a search waiver on scene. Say we have the parents or someone that's involved with the vehicle, we don't have to come back to the station and fill out a permission form to be able to search that vehicle's the black box or whatever you want to call it, the data module. We can fill that out in the car. So we can fill that out, have them sign it in the car, or if you have the system, you can have them sign electronically. It just depends on whatever your agency rules are for that. So whenever we start looking at these forms, these are what make the products and then make your products that you're bringing into your system. So these are our state crash forms. They're ridiculous, overly specific, and have to be done a certain way. There's rules for every single box of what can be there and what can't be there. Now, what I can do is I can make these forms in our system and replicate them without having to go and actually like draw every shape and everything that's within the form. So I'll show you a little bit of tips and tricks of that. But basically, our state gives us a handful of PDFs. And the PDFs, what you would normally fill out, and you would have so many characters to put in a box, we can convert those in the system and fill those out. In this case, I fill those out with Word just because I have data from the system and I just want it filled out on there. And what you can do is you can have your text come into that form so that it looks exactly the way that the state's form would be, so they don't know any different, other than your system is fulfilling whatever it needs to do. You can go so far as to create any kind of colored or non-colored templates. That way, here's an example of memorandums, some samples of letterheads. These sample letterheads that are filled out, if I fill one out and someone else opens one of these up and fills it out, they're going to look the same. It's going to look uniform throughout. So not everyone has a different version of a letterhead or the wrong letterhead, or I don't send someone a letterhead and then someone else gets one that doesn't match. We're all on the same page. And if you fill it out within a custom module, then I can see what else someone has sent to someone. I can see if one of my records clerks has sent over something to another agency. That way I'm not doing that. I don't end up like duplicating their work. We all see on the same page. So if one of my records clerks is not here and someone comes in with a request and they want to see, maybe a letter was mailed the day before they went out. Well, I can go in there and I can see, they generated a form and they sent this out. I can either print a duplicate of it there, or in the case, tell them just to wait that it's been mailed to them. But we're more on the same page. But basically, all that comes down to is I'm using the features of Word. The forms on the left, it's all images. So I want my department logo as a watermark on the back. I want my patch to show up a certain way. I want the text to show a certain way. I can lock those features down. So that way, the only thing that can be entered on there in those cases are the individual data blocks that go into tags. That way, we're all on the same page. So let's take the state crash form for an example. So we're going to take page 3. Page 3 was the first one I did. So it's just probably about the easiest form that's on our crash form. So if you open up the PDF, you can see that all the blue boxes are areas that I have to fill out data every single time. And basically, when you fill these out, is you have to click on each one and enter the data, and we've done that for years and years. But what I'm going to do is put this in the system. So I'm going to bring this into Word. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to print this out as an image. So if I print this as an image, I now have exactly what the form looks like, and I want to use it as a watermark in the background. So the difference between a watermark in the background and what I'm going to do is the watermark is going to be slightly faded. It's going to be centered. It's not going to go edge to edge. But what you can do with a picture is if you put the picture in here, I'm going to move the top bar over here so you can see this a little bit better. If I choose to use this as a picture, and I put the picture in here, I can tell the system that or tell Word that I want text to go in front of the picture. So if you print this off from here and you print it off from PDF, it's not going to look any different. It's the exact same thing. And then what I'm going to do to add text on here is I'm going to draw a table on top of that image. And then I've left little boxes where I'm going to have the data go. And each one of those little boxes, I'm going to insert tags. So I'm going to put those tags because I know exactly where they need to go. So to demonstrate this a little bit, I've deleted the image off here. So you can see that the only thing that's on this page is a table and tags. So on the left side, I've got tags. On the right side, I'm just showing that if I was preparing to do this, if I look at where I'm going, I know there's going to be a lot of data. So it's easier for me, you can do this anyway. But what I've done is I always know I've got a page 1 and page 2. And I have a case number. That's just standard the way I do stuff. But I took every box that I'm going to have to put text. I marked off the ones that I don't have to put text. So I marked an X on 2 fields that the state doesn't require. It tells us not to put information in. And everything else, I've given it just a number designation. So I counted out all my boxes, 1 through 61. And then I went into my table, and then I put my tag with 1 through 61 all the way through and through. So that way, whenever you put your image on there, and your image is behind that table, then you can highlight everything that's in that table that you've already done, and then just make the table have no borders whatsoever. So if you remove the borders, everything shows up exactly the way that the state's form would look like if you printed it on a PDF. So if you're in the system completing this, you can create all your custom blocks. So in this case, there's some data that's in there, but a lot of these are questions that the users are going to have to fill out. So these go through and through, and it's just a bunch of questions that are on there they fill out for Unit 1 and Unit 2. But at least they don't have to go through a PDF and fill out the PDF, which is going to take even more time because you got to go open each page one by one. What they could do, again, some of this data, this is a page 3 of 4, but say you had a 4-vehicle rack. Well, the data section for what the vehicles we're going to do is different, but think about it. The light, weather, locality, type of intersection, incident type, harmful events, case number, collision zone, those are things that can be copied over. So we would use that save values for new. And that would limit the amount of extra work that they have to do to fill out an additional form for their case. Same thing can be done for every single one of the state's crash forms, and that's what I've done. Of course, once you get into like some of the other pages, they're a little bit more extensive, but it's not anything more complex that once you get it filled out there, you can do that. You can probably do this with Excel. It just happened to be that when I really started getting into this early in the years of our transition into CAD, this was one of my first projects. So at this time, Word was the one that I used for this. So we'll get into that in just a little bit, what the major benefits of using Excel are over Word. So you notice that in the forms, that all of the characters I have in there are block type and they're uppercase, but maybe the officers are filling something out. Your users are selecting and they're writing what they want, but they're probably not going to think about, ooh, do I need to have caps lock on? Do I not? That's something where you can actually control by using those custom forms. So the custom forms allow you to do conditional formatting, which makes sure that the text displays uniformly. It displays the fonts, the colors, and the case sizes that you want. So again, let's go through this. So this is a sample. So say I have Mustang Police Department coming into here. Now, that's your standard font that's going to be on this template. If I put a tag right there, the tag is going to be in the same font, size, color, highlight, anything that is entered in this form. It's just going to fill out that tag there. So if I highlight this, and I change, let's go back. So if I change what I want this to do, so if I change the color, the size, and I delete that, and I put that tag there, that tag is going to now display any text that comes in to that tag exactly the way that I have it written here. So any of the selections that show up on here, so you have, other than your license plate, you've got a vehicle make, colors, model, the record service, and all those questions that show up below are all going to be in maybe like proper case or maybe not even like formatted at all. But you have vehicle VIN, you have the owner, you have location, you have owner's address, all that stuff is uppercase. So if you don't want to have a mix of both and you want it to be uniform, you can go in and select that in there. So those drop downs that I have on this previous page, what you could do alternatively is you could have a yes or no option that's no and yes in like proper case. And you have another one that's going to be yes or no in all caps. Now that's a good option that you can do that kind of helps some of the work that you have to do here, but you don't necessarily have to do that if you're using Word. You can have it either way. Where that will come into place is, so here's another one. So here's the letterhead that I've got. Letterhead, these are the items that I'm going to have on there. Now, the way that those show up, I want them to visualize and all be the exact same on the top of my letterhead form. So this is when I talk about the uniformity, that everyone fills everything out and it looks the same, whether I do it or I have a records clerk do it, or chief does it, or I write a letter for the chief, or we were a detective sends something out. That text will show up on the top of the letterhead exactly that same format. So when I talk about the yes or no option on here, you have some options on here, but not a whole bunch if you're really looking for more configurability. So here's a yes or no checkbox. So your option for yes or no checkbox is going to be an X or a line. That's basically what it is. There's a few other options on here. But say you have a form like our state's DPS form. It doesn't have yes or no checkboxes where a check or a line is going to work. It actually has a very specific like heavy check mark and a heavy X. Well, any symbol that's in the system, you could make a custom dropdown and have as an option for your users to fill out. So anything that's going to be within this symbols tab. So if you go into Word and you're on the insert tab, there's a little button on the far right that says symbol. You can open that up, and anything that's within any of those options, you can copy and you can put into the system. So you can see on the middle of that, I have the trademark symbol that I use for our thermal mobile printers. But you could put anything in there. You could put the little alien. You could put a star. Anything that's within the system, you could do it. There's a motorcycle guy if for some reason you had something to do that. Train, police car, ambulance, any of that stuff could be put in there. So don't think that you're limited by only what's in the system. That's probably the most interesting thing about this. I think that you can get real creative. So here's my check mark that I talked about earlier. So this is our DPS form. A DPS requires a check or an X. And neither one of those exist in the system. So all I did was go in and copy it between Word and there, and that's the officer's selection, check or an X. The check or X will display on that page. Okay, since I don't have any fun videos in between, we're going to dive into the Excel. Excel's a little bit more detailed. So the first thing I'm going to talk about with Excel is formatting. So we're going to talk about the same situation, formatting techniques, if you're going to use Excel. Excel works quite a bit differently from Word if you're wanting to have text show up differently. So say I have support services here, and on the left, on that block A1, I have 0. So if I want the box that I have open, and I want to have it look different, you have to create a rule through conditional formatting on here. Conditional formatting is basically tells a block to do one thing based on the values of another block, or any other limitation in here. I use if formulas more than I use anything else. So what we're going to say on here is, here's the colors for my department. So this is our gold and blue. So say I want support service to show up gold and blue if the character that's in block A1, if it equals 1. If it equals anything other than 1, it's going to show up exactly as you see it right now, where it's just black and white. So what I've done is I've created a rule that says if A1 equals 1, it's going to be gold. If otherwise, it's going to be 0. So if I bring data in from custom forms, and I have a data that shows up in there. Now, I'm just using just numbers for example, but it could be anything as complex as a specific word, yes, no, any kind of option that you have in there. It doesn't have to be just numbers. It could be anything. But if I bring that in there, and I bring in a 1, now you're having different colors in there. So this really gets into, you can start to have forms that have different values for both the questions and the answers that you put on the page based on what's coming in from your system. So we'll go through this, and this will hopefully start to give you some more insight into what you can do. So before we get into more of those options, I'm going to talk about some of the simple formulas that I use on here. So a lot of these formulas, if I'm a little bit confusing, you can there's a million workshops on YouTube and stuff. If you can't find something, it's on there, or I can share some of the ones that I think are the most popular that have worked for me. Some of them are too long, but really all it comes down to is just a few simple ones. So what I like about these the most is these allow a form to be used for more than one purpose. So I'll give an example. So we have a taser deployment page. And when I say deployment, I'm going to correct myself. We have a taser activation form, and we have a taser application form. So your activation is going to be anything we're using the device for anything de-escalation that you have not actually deployed or fired the object or contacted anyone with. You take out and you use an ARC display, and you gain compliance from a subject. On the flip side, you take that form and you have a different form that you would fill out if you actually deployed it, because at that point we're going to need to know cartridge serial numbers, device used, were there any injuries, how were the probes removed, where were they stored. So that's two different forms. But what you can do using formulas and using what we were using before is, if a certain formula is put in the box, like say you have a field that says activation or application. If it says activation, you can have the Excel sheet show up with the 4 questions that you may want on there. Like, was an ARC test used? Was a laser displayed? Did it gain compliance? Were there any injuries? But if you have an activation, you're going to have those 4 questions plus 20 more, including serial number and all that. But if you don't have an application, then you're not going to see any of that information that's on there. So that's where it comes down to, you can use one form that can be flexible enough that it can be used in both situations, so you're not stacking your system with a whole bunch of forms, one for one thing and one for another. Forms can become multi-purpose. So the functions and the equations that you can use in Excel really help with that. So that's where we'll get into here. So we're going to take that same box that I have 1 in, and let's say that this box is a value based on 2 other boxes that are coming from ProSuite. So say one box is going to be one value and one is another. So I'll use the sum equation to get to rule what happens in box C. So if I have 1 plus 1 equals 2, obviously it changes. But I'm going to change one other feature on here now that I think that one's pretty straightforward. I want to say this is a sample form that's sent out from my division, and maybe I have one form that's going to be from records, or another one that's going to be from communications in jail. So say the communications printer prints off black and white, or the records printer prints off color. So I want things to be black and white in one area and color in another. So what we'll do is we'll also control this. So I'm going to use block C2. I'm sorry. C2. So I'm going to use an if statement. And basically what an if statement is it says, if this, then this. If it isn't this, then do this. So you've got, if our block A2 equals 2, then I want it to display true. If it doesn't equal, if it doesn't equal 1, then I want it to display false. So what we'll do is in that equation, I'll put if that block A1 equals 1. I put parentheses, quotation marks. Quotation marks are telling Excel that this is text, not a number, so it will display correctly. So if A1 equals 1, I want the text under support services to say communications in jail, so it'll print off on their printer on black and white. But if it says records and they have a color printer, I want it to do that. Actually, flip that. Go the other way around. My bad. So if you have, so you see the box that says 2. So 2 is going to show support services and its records in black and white. But if it shows 1, then it's going to show support services, communications in jail. So it's all based on one block's decision, but in reality, it's what's coming in from blocks A2 and B2, but it's controlling everything else. So that's a simple, probably a way over convoluted explanation of the way this works. But I'm going to show you some of the other forms on here, the way this can be used, so hopefully I can demonstrate it a little bit better. So here's some other forms that you can fill out and do this with. So of course we already went through the incarceration sheet that calculates your prices for you. You could do the same things with the records form. Records form can also calculate your prices and stuff because you can automatically do your sum or any kind of multiplication easier than you can a lot of the text. But when you start getting into where you want the text to actually visually say something different, here's a juvenile custody release sheet. The juvenile release sheet could be very different because at the bottom of this page, I have it released to parent. But what happens if they're not released to parent? Then that whole section is not important. What's important is what agency, what facility was the juvenile released to. So I'll show some test samples of what that could look like. But you could also get into, like we said, if you print an envelope in records, it's going to come out black and white. But if you print an envelope on the administration computer, it's going to print out color. So that can be controlled with just one text. So I'll give you a couple examples of those, and I think it will illustrate my point just a little bit better. So just a rehash. If you want to use any kind of number equations, just use Excel. So we already went through this one where it has days in jail. I'm multiplying days in jail times 30, and then I'm adding anything that come in from the system for cost node. So if it's $30 for one day, and they get a $30 charge for a RIP blanket, total cost will be $60. But they don't have to worry about that. They just have to put just those values in the system. So here's a juvenile sheet. So the juvenile sheet, as I said, if it's a release to parent, it's pretty straightforward. But if it's not released to parent, things need to be changed. So let's start at the very top of the form. So you can see where it says parent, guardian, custodian notified of detention. If the custodian is notified of the detention, then that we need to know who notified, what officer notified. But what happens if they don't notify them for whatever reason or not? What if they can't notify them? What if they're unable to be reached? Well, then it's a little bit different, because then I don't need to know why, if they were notified. I need to know why they weren't notified. So I need to know a reason they weren't notified. So we'll change that text. So on the left, you can see that I have notified by officer, but on the right, we're going to say that we're going to change the values that are going to say reason not notified. So I have a block in here that's very much similar to whenever I turned the color text white and I turned the table blank in our previous form for Word document, where I put an image on there where you can't see that. So the same thing's going on here. So the text exists on the form and it's calculating. It's on the form, but it's white. You just can't see it. It's in the background. So that's very a tricky way of putting things on here. So there's actually a lot of calculations going on. Your users just don't see that it's happening in the background. So my reason not notified is actually changed. So if parent or guardian is notified of detention, if that is yes, then I want that reason they're not notified, or the reason who they're notified, to show up. But if they're not, I need to know why they weren't notified, and I want that to show up. So you'll see that on the right side where it says upper, and this is upper twice. What that's doing is I'm conditionally formatting whatever response the officer types into the field to all show up in the same uniform style text. So it looks like it was an answer from the system as if it was a dropdown. So if they write in there all lowercase letters, unable to notify parent because telephone disconnected, a voicemail full, whatever the case. If they put that in there, it will all show up exactly the same font, exactly the same text height. Everything will be uniform. So let's look at the bottom. So the same thing is happening on the bottom too. So this one's released to parent. So if you see on the on the right side of the page, it says release to, and then I'm using a tag, number 5. Number 5 is going to be a drop-down that the officer gets. It's going to be released to agency, released to facility, whatever. So you can see that my if equation is basically saying if that block says release to facility, then I don't need to know parent. What I need to know is what facility. If it's released to agency, I need to know what agency. So that's what my if equation is basically saying here. And if you see below that in the little colored text, little colored blocks that are on there, that's the hidden text that's going on in between here that hides those values of where it's calculated. So let's look at this from what the officer sees. So the officer doesn't see anything different other than the required fields that they have to fill out for this juvenile release form. So they get those fields. Was the parent notified? And it's yes or no. The officer releasing custody of juvenile 2. Did they release him to a parent? Did they release him to a guardian? Did they release him to a facility? Did they release him to another agency? That's going to drive what the final form looks like. So when you see these are the exact way that Officer Norman filled everyone out. Parent was notified. There's a reason where they were notified. And then at the bottom it says they were released to parent. So obviously those fill out exactly the way our demo filled out. But if those values change, so if they're not able to be notified, you can see that he could make a different note. Unable to reach via phone and in person. He tried. At least anyone that prints this form out and gets it in the case file is able to read this form, and they don't see an unusable block of text because they weren't contacted. What they see is they were unable to be reached via phone and in person. So it answers questions without having to go back into the system and try to find something out, because we created those blocks to display what we need to know. And where were they given to? Obviously, they weren't given to the parents. They were turned over to a facility. So in this case, the facility is our local county justice center. So it doesn't need to say parent on there. It needs to say facility. And it wasn't an agency. We didn't turn them over to human services or another police department. We turned them over to an actual facility. So this helps. And what you can really expand on that, if you look below that, as opposed to need to know the parent's phone number or any information like that. There's some more fields that we're going to need to know. Who was the officer that was releasing them to another agency? What was the judge's name that authorized that child being taken into custody? And what was the representative at the facility that released them to? Those are values that change depending on where the juvenile is released to. But this form is flexible enough and it's multi-purpose enough that it can be used for more than one thing without having to have duplicates of the same form in there for different circumstances. So when you get into about the same concept, but if you want to do different colors. So we're doing the exact same thing that we did on the other form. The only thing we're doing is we're changing the color values for all of those. So this is a combination. So here's a sample envelope template that I have filled out. So say I'm filling out this template. All the required fields are filled out with the exception of the style that's in the right-hand corner. The right-hand corner is asking you basically, what printer do you want to send this to? So if you have a color printer, you can fill anything out. But if you have a black and white printer, it doesn't do you any good to send a color printer to it because it will look trashy, basically. So to help everybody out, because you've got some people that don't fill out envelopes very often, I have some information. I have area it just has some instructions on there, and those instructions just help people know how to set their printer settings. It doesn't do anything for the actual system. It's just some reminders I put in there, but the style is important. The style tells you what color you want to print out. So that may play an even bigger role if you do anything for like Autism Awareness Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, No Shave November, anything. You could literally do anything in there. So these two examples are just two different types, but you can really go on and on. So here's 4 examples that I have in here. So I've got a black, a color, I added a grayscale just for the heck of it, and I've got a Breast Cancer Awareness Month just for fun. So any of those 4 options, either one of those that you chose, all 4 of those print off a different style envelope. So there's 4 different kinds with one single form. And here's the way that this works. So inside Excel, I have this form set up to those same dimensions that were on the top sheet. So my printer knows how to look for this. So you can see that there's only 2 values that are really coming in from the system that need to be filled out. So 1 and 2. So 1 is going to be who it's sent to. 2 is going to be the address. Who it's from is always going to be the same. That's from us. But the values that change on here are what colors they are. So using Excel in ProSuite, Excel is only going to print sheet 1. It's not going to print sheet 2. So you can see I have 2 sheets on here. So here's your main sheet that has the letter that's going to be printed out. And I have a hidden block here. This hidden block is where these 4 characters go. It's black, color, grayscale, October. You could have more, you could have less, any way you want to do it. So all of the other colors on the page are formatted. So I did conditional formatting to change different colors based on those 4 values. If it says color, then the colors for the page are this. If it says black, the colors are done for this. Grayscale, October, on and on. So sheet number 2. Sheet number 2 has everything in the A column is the different variations of our patch for the envelope. On the B, I just left, this is not used, it's only for reference for me. So I remember what the title of each column is. So what happens is you basically can create defined names of what each block is in the system. So if you look at on the formulas tab where it says define names, I've got black, color, grayscale, October. There's a 5th one. And the 5th one is called logo. And there's a formula in here that basically says that whatever, based on this option, whatever is stated in my block, black, color, grayscale, October, it will show up from this sheet. So if I choose black, black is going to show up where I have logo on my sheet. So if I have color, color will show up, but you can't see it on there. But what's happening is where the emblem is, I'll go back. Where the emblem is on page 1, it just says logo. But that logo is doing a formula that's indirectly saying to reference to that page that ProSuite won't print. It's only going to print page 1, but it's looking at that. So if I have black on here, and then I change to color, color calculates and says, put the color in that block. And the conditional formatting changes everything else to the colors that I have set. So that's a little bit much. There's probably an easier way to do that. I will say that if that doesn't make sense, I will share an easier Excel document. It makes a little bit more sense if you're looking at it one-on-one. Or I can do a specific live or recorded demonstration. I can actually build one out, and it makes a little bit more sense than actually just looking at it in Words or this PowerPoint. So if that helps, just let me know, because I know that can be a little bit much. So what I'll get through when I am completing this is I'm going to connect the dots between what we're using these forms for, to just kind of bring things full circle. So when I talked about the mental health restitution that we get, some of the money that comes from there, here's what we need for an officer to fill out. So here's a mental health travel form that gets filled out. The state's going to want to know who we transported, where we started, where we ended, and what was it back to here. I also give an option on the bottom that the officer can add some notes if for some reason they need to put them in there. We don't use that, but it's good to have it just in case. It's easier to have it there and not need it than it is to need it later and not have it. It'll help reports with the forms quite a bit. So, like I said, this form is completed on a certain event. So we have several different categories of when these events are needed. So where it says call type under travel reason, these are incident codes. So depending on the incident code, my workflow rule in system admin is basically saying when this incident happens, then I want to update and make sure that the officer completes this form. So it's called update form requiredness, and I can choose the form that they fill out. What I want to do is when this offense is created on the system. So if I have an emergency order detention or a mental health transport, the system will update and say, you have to complete this form. So back on their case, they don't have a choice. The same exact thing can happen for property evidence that's created in the system. If you have a record that needs to be created to make sure you get dispositions, you can do the same thing. This one is actually showing that depending on where an officer puts evidence, they'll actually have a disposition on there, because if they have like video or something like that, maybe that's not so important because that goes into a different location. But a physical evidence item is going to need a disposition form. That way we can get it out of here whenever the case finishes, or whether it's dismissed or whatever the situation may be. So this helps them make sure that they complete that. That way we get that on record. The same thing can happen depending on where you have charges filed at. So depending on what court, for us, every court that we have, we give them a case cover sheet. So this is going to have everything that's completed in there. Our media page, that's an obvious one. Every case is going to need that. So basically, a case is created, you got to create a media page. I don't care if it's an unused case number. You create a media page. It won't say anything other than unused case number, but it's still filled out. So back to this mental health form. This helps us run the statistics that are needed for the reports outside of here. So if I think about this from a managerial perspective, you have the case that's created. So the case that's created has all this data in there. I got to figure out how can I manage this and get this to where it needs to go so it not only works for the user or the officer that filled this out, but as the administrator that has to submit this documentation in, how do I get it there? So since I know that this is something that happens every single time, I will use the report section, and I'll create this report that pulls all of those data segments that I'm requiring. So you see that all of these show up here. I choose what I want them to look like on the report, and I choose how that I want them to be sorted. So you can see that on the top, I have automatic stuff being put in. So I have case number. Well, the case number is going to automatically pull any other information from the case automatically. So it's going to have, the officer that did this. It's going to have, it would go so far as to say the officer's hiring date if it did. It's all a cascade effect of the data and how it's all connected to one another. So I have this form that's created automatically. So this is the form that we provide to the state. So the state form that's put in here is filled out. Now I'm going to go one more step further. Since I know that this case is going to, if this case form is going to need to be sent out on a regular basis, you can use recurring reports to make sure that the person in charge of this receives this report. So you go into recurring reports and you can create and set the time that this report is sent to an individual that's responsible for this. So basically it makes sure that that one person doesn't even, almost doesn't even have to spend any extra effort to make sure that they do this task. So all they have to do is receive this, they preview it, make sure that it has the right data in there, make sure that all the case numbers are in there. They already have the report sent to them. All they have to do is make sure that it matches up with everything that they've reviewed over the previous month. With that recurring report, it's automatically emailed to them. That way, all that person is responsible for is once they know that that is the correct information, they can send it out, and it eliminates any extra work that they had to, and it will make it as automated as possible. So when we get into who sees what reports, not just reports, but who is offered what cases, case forms, custom modules. So that's where you get into choosing who can see what. So you note that this is a simple case report on here that's going to have, I've chosen for the form values on here. You can see I've got collision reports. Well, collision reports really don't do much for animal welfare. Like I said, they fall under our purview. So they write cases in our system, but they're not going to have to write nearly the amount of reports that are on here. So I don't want to make it difficult for them to have to come into the system and go through a huge list of different form types that they would do. I think it would make their job even more complex because they don't use it as much as we do. So at least for cases, under case forms, not the custom case forms, but just the case form section, you can actually open up and you can see in here and you can choose who sees what forms that are created and who doesn't. So as you can see, animal welfare has no reason to use a crime scene entry log, a collision report, any kind of intel reports or anything. But I do need them to do initial offense reports. I do need them to write narratives. I do need, maybe they need to provide something like print out in a vehicle or giving someone a case number or something like that. So those are some of the things that I have on here. But likewise, the system family violence form, we don't use that. It doesn't meet the requirements for what we have to do. We have quite a different requirement that's on there. So I have that even disabled for our police report types. So basically, there's 3 options on here. And it just tells you what the form name is, what the form type is, and then what organization the form is disabled for. Anyone that's not on there is obviously who can access that. If you were to open any one of them, you just choose who cannot see. Not who can, but who cannot see the form. That'll make it a little bit easier for them. So custom modules would be somewhere where your form doesn't really fall under a specific, let's say, doesn't really fall under some other value that it would need to be in there. So it's not a case, it's not a tow, it's not a CFS. It's my envelope. It's a letterhead. It's a memo. An animal owner log, like, what's dog's name? What's the gate codes for the neighborhood? All those sort of things can do custom forms, as we've seen in my envelope. Those I've listed under custom modules. Custom module permissions basically tell who can see and who can't see. Now, do I need patrol officers being able to write letterhead with the chief on there? Absolutely not. And one, he wouldn't let it happen. But there are certain people that can write letters on behalf of the chief, and he would want to grant those people permission. So what you can do is choose any kind of custom module you want to see, and those custom modules that you write in system back under your personnel groups or within an individual personnel record, you can choose what the options are. So just like your case forms, where someone would have the ability to write certain case forms on their case, these choose who can edit, open, or remove any kind of custom modules. So if an animal welfare opens up their main menu, they're only going to be able to see custom modules that are available for them. They're not going to see all these envelopes and stuff like that. They probably don't see very much that's on there. So when I talk about forms that go a little bit further than that, my goal would be to go even further with eliminating paper records that get lost, they get torn up, you can't find them, they're not in the same place. And so what I've when I talk about going forward on things, our in-house training that we do for, say, our NCIC certification. So that's my section on here. If I have an in-house certification, you can actually import that all in the system on here. So I've made this twofold. So first off, if someone is not familiar with the system on how to do this, they're not comfortable with it, they can still access this. But if they are comfortable with doing it and they've been trained to do it on the system and do it the same way, we can keep everything under the personnel records. So for onboarding, so this is an employee onboarding. So basically the day that I create their record in the system, I can actually have them sit beside me on a training computer and log in under their name with the name that shows up. And I will give them permission to go into personnel under that first day that they're here. That way they can get in and sign their information. And it will say that it's signed under their name. So here's a limited access agreement that we would sign for NCIC. So you can see that this is just a standard Word form. Information is going from one form to another. There's no complex values or anything for this one. I just want it on a form and I want it electronic. That way I don't have paper going all over the place and I don't have to worry about what to keep and what not to keep. It's always in the system under personnel. And I can always print it if I need to, but at least it's there. That's the central place for it. So it will all show up under their personnel record. Now, everything's on there. As you see on the bottom, I have signed personnel records. So that's the exact same form. It's just showing you that that one is signed. Now, when I talk about the training forms we do on here, we do have to do a mandatory training test to make sure that they understand and have the knowledge, and we can attest that they understand how to use NCIC to our state's requirements. So here's the old PDF handwritten test that we would fill out. So I've taken this and I've combined everything into Excel, and I've created a custom form under personnel. So this custom form, basically, like I said, when I sit them down with me, if it's me doing the onboarding, we'll go over the training, and then I'll have them fill out this test. They basically just mark an X on everything that they choose their answer. They go all the way down to the bottom, and then they click yes or no that they've been finished with the test. When that's completed, the Excel sheet will actually grade them based on those values that are in the system. So I'm telling it, check mark is yes and an X equals no. And you can see that on this one, I actually had the officer sign. So this is not something that I could go in and modify or make or go in and use. It's got his physical signature on here, and these can also be printed out and put into your physical personnel record they use. But at least I don't have to carry anything extra my desk because I know it's all here. So when we look at what's going on this sheet on the backdrop, so you can see that there's really not much on here. The actual values for grading the test are hidden. So the only thing that shows up is the green answers that are the correct one, and the red ones that are going to be incorrect based on what the officer selects. But in blue, you can see that what I've done is I've graded everything that's a check mark shows up as a 1 point correct, and everything that's an X shows up as a 0 point. Then throughout all 4 pages, it grades, goes down to the bottom, and if it calculates the correct score, it grades them under the grade column. So if you printed it out in Excel, it would look like this. So this doesn't do any good because it's got all my tags in there and it's got all my answers in there. But what you can do is, like I said, if the person doing the onboarding is not comfortable with how to fill this out, they don't have to go searching on the server to try to figure out where this form is and where, they get lost when they're trying to fill something out. Well, at least on this point, they know that on the personnel record in the system, they can go in and they can print off the form. They don't necessarily have to fill it out. That's just an option that's on there. So if you have someone doing training that's unfamiliar with how to do this, or it doesn't have the resources to do this, they can still go into the system and access it, but yet it won't show any of those marks that I've put on the Excel sheet. So you can do that with like literally anything that's in the system on here. But you can also go back through and you can actually do it in the system if you want. So it's flexible between both options. So you could either do it the original way or you could do it the really neat calculating way. So that gives some different options that are on there. So now that I've talked for like 2 hours, I'll give a quick final thought on here. So my final thought is always keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your system. Keep your forms in mind. Like I said, I started with the crash form day 1, and it wasn't something I was able to really get for like at least like the first like 6 months. I started actually making some headway on it, but revisit those forms and see if they could use any updates. So when I look at the form now and I tell you, yeah, I used Word with it, but do I really think that I can improve it by using Excel? Yeah, wholeheartedly. So I still go back to this day and I'm able to find forms that I'm able to update. The drop-down record data was something that wasn't in Zerker whenever we started with that. That was a relatively new thing. Whenever that option came about, I revisited every form. But when I go back now, I still find forms that we created day 1, 2017, 2018 that we have in the system that needed changes. You never know when you find a form that has an old chief's name on it, or an old address, or an old phone number or something. So it doesn't hurt to go back through the list and just every once in a while look at it and go, oh, this could be changed or this could be added. That's a good thing to look out for. So I know I'm not able to ask any questions, and usually this is probably about the time where everyone wants to leave. So thank you if you stuck around through this whole thing. Sorry for being, again, over 2 hours long. But here's me. You probably already have my information if you've done this, but I'll write my name down electronically. And all my information is right here. So a special thanks to everyone that actually showed up for my presentation. I know I went kind of over there too, but I really appreciate it. And I hope I gave something that was useful. And like I said, if you have any compliments, improvements, concerns, or complaints, definitely let me know. I'm always open to improving. And that, like I said, the biggest thing I get out of this is what I learned from other people. It's been all my connections with Zerker and CentralSquare over the years that have helped me learn how to do everything that I do now. I owe a lot to them for my own career and what I do here. And everyone here feels the effects of what I do because of all the help I've had. So I appreciate it. If anyone has any feedback or anything, and you have any complaints or anything, then feel free to email my chief, of course. That's an easy email, police@cityofmustang.org. You can feel free to tell him I did a terrible job, or if you want me to make a visit, and maybe he'll send me your way. So if you have anything else or any questions, stay in touch, please. The networking is the best thing that I've got going on here. So if there's anything I can help with, let me know. No, for sure. And with that, I say adieu and end of slideshow. So thank you very much. Have a good day, night, evening, wherever you are. Be safe no matter what. Bye.